Hello and welcome to The Big Fight. Where does the right to privacy end? Where does the right to information actually begin? For a while now, we've been really building up the RTI and trying to make sure that there's a completely free flow of information. It has been believed that this is one of the best ways to counter corruption, which all of us have been really worried about for a long time. Now, a new set of concerns, though, have been expressed by the Prime Minister and also indirectly by the Supreme Court that where does RTI end and where does the right to privacy actually begin? And the Prime Minister, for example, has said that the RTI should not be allowed to impinge on personal privacy. What should be the norms that we should follow and what should be the direction that we take forward? That's what we're going to be discussing on The Big Fight today. And let me welcome all of our really distinguished panelists. Manish Tiwari, spokesperson of the Congress Party. We're going to be getting you to talk a little bit as to what the Prime Minister may or may not have meant. Mr. Shailesh Gandhi, former Central Information Commissioner. Thank you so much, sir, for bringing some of your expert opinion to this. Ryan Karanjawala, who's dealt with a couple of major cases in the entire area of the right to privacy. So, Ryan, it's fantastic to have you with us. Nikhil Dey is a co-convener of NCPRI, and he's been one of the major forces behind the right to information. Your views will be fascinating to get. Gopal Jain, senior advocate, wonderful to have you with us. And Dr. Kamlesh Bajaj, CEO, Data Security Council of India. He's a member of the Shah Committee, which has really expressed its views very strongly on the question of privacy and what it thinks should happen there. And finally, we're being joined from Chennai by Mr. M.G. Devsaham, who's a former IAS officer and a RTI applicant as well. Thank you all for being with us. Manish, why don't I kick off with you? The Prime Minister says we need to worry about where the RTI is headed and whether that affects the right to privacy. Are these attempts to dilute RTI?
Well, I think it's an attempt to find the golden median. It's exactly where the freedom of speech, it's exactly on the same lines as the debate on freedom of speech as to where does the right to freedom of speech end and where does the right to reputation or the right to protect yourself commence. I think the RTI has really been something which has completely transformed the governance landscape of this country. It's truly been revolutionary, over the past 8 years of its implementation. But as everything new, it takes a while for things to settle down. And I think at this point in time, we are poised in trying to determine as to where does the golden median between the right to information and the right to privacy lie, whether public interest really extends to intruding into the bedrooms of people, whether the right to privacy,
their travel plans or their health
or whether the right to privacy, which has been carved out of Article 21 by the Supreme Court itself, is also sacrosanct because every individual does have a certain right to privacy, which nobody really needs to get into. So I think as we go along and as this debate evolves, somewhere the golden median will settle, between the right to information and the right to privacy.
Okay, Mr. Gandhi, you have been writing about the fact that you think the Supreme Court is now questioning the untrammeled use of the RTI. You believe the Supreme Court now is saying that perhaps privacy is as important, if not more, than the right to information.
That's right. He mentioned that if certain limits are transgressed, it should be an issue. But there is not one instance where anybody is pointing out where the limits have been transgressed, neither by the Supreme Court nor by the Prime Minister. And yet when everybody starts talking about right to privacy being a key issue and saying, look, we must not transgress, a doubt comes that people feel that whatever is being exposed just now is now sought to be, and it's actually happened. The Supreme Court in its judgments has started saying that things which were earlier held to be in public domain even before the Right to Information Act came are now being held as invasions on privacy. So therefore there is a very great concern if the Prime Minister and the Supreme Court are talking the same language.
Ryan, you've argued often that the right to privacy is something that should be treated as important as anything
else. We are
in court,
in fact, on that very issue, but in a slightly different context. That issue came up in the context of a phone tap, and there, of course, we went to court and the matter is being adjudicated upon. And our case over there was very clear that phone tapping is something that only a government can do, and it can do so in very limited circumstances. And it can do so only at when the highest levels of authority sign off on such a thing. Once the material is tapped, it's incumbent on the government under the rules itself to first sift the information. For example, you can only phone tap if there is a criminal investigation on or you're worried about terrorism. Then you have to sift the material itself. All that is ungermane has to be destroyed. The rest of it has to be preserved for the purpose of the investigation. Our case there was very clear that no one can then suddenly leak it out to the press and the press suddenly put it in all the newspapers or the TV channels only because it makes interesting reading. That was, of course, a case which did not come under the Right to Privacy Act. That came under a completely different issue.
Okay,
but I agree with Manish on one point, that this act has been a very salutary act. It has done a lot of good, and it is continuing to do a lot of good. What does happen sometimes with when a new act comes into force and information commissioners, especially people who have not had judicial training, sometimes may, in a burst of exuberance, suddenly spell out a whole lot of decisions. I came across one in which they had allowed a particular, all the incoming calls on a particular phone to be information to be leaked out. So sometimes when things overreach in that manner, courts do tend to step in and try to nuance the whole situation, which is what I think the Supreme Court at the moment is in the process of doing.
Okay, Nikhil, you fought so long and so hard for the RTI. Are you concerned about any attempt that is made whatsoever to circumscribe the RTI? Or do you think it is fair to say that, look, RTI can go up to a point, but no further?
Yeah, I think there are two things. One is that, yes, we fought hard, not just for bringing the RTI, but also for defending the RTI. And there is no doubt that over and over and over again, there have been attempts to weaken it, to dilute it. And it is one act that has been protected by the people. Now, what concerns me is not the fact that the right to privacy should not exist. It's very important. It's there in the RTI. Section 8(1)(j) outlines privacy as an exemption to the RTI. Those areas where there is no particular public interest. What concerns me is the Prime Minister or the Supreme Court putting RTI and juxtaposing RTI and privacy. Within RTI, privacy is there. It is that someone else, like in freedom of speech, some other private person can't peep into my life, nor can government peep into my life if it's not a matter that concerns the state. It's those things that are much more important rather than me asking government for information that lies with the state. I can't imagine how I can get call records of a person because that doesn't lie with the state. That's not information that is held by the state.
I think,
Vikram, there is a case, that was a case where the phone was paid for by the government.
Right. Now, if the phone is paid for by the government, in my opinion, that's public funds. And that's a very important area where people feel privacy is being abrogated, but anything in public
funds... So the use of government funds, you think, is therefore public interest, so therefore there's no question of privacy.
Must be, including...
incoming calls don't have a use of
I think, Vikram,
that's also true.
I think, Vikram, we again need to draw a line. Everything which is government paid for is not essentially public. For example, I think the determining factor with regard to the right to information...
Why isn't it the case? If the government is paying for it, it's indirectly the use of public funds.
I will tell you. Ultimately, the right to information is to access information which is in public interest. Now, for example, you have an RTI which says that how many cups of tea were served, by a particular bureaucrat, during the course of a particular day. What time did he come into the office? Who did he meet? Who did he not meet? I mean, you see, these are the kind of frivolous RTIs which are occupying a bulk of the time of the people.
And that is why, the time of the government.
And that is why, Vikram, if you go back to that Supreme Court order, the Supreme Court order very categorically says, the 9th August 2011 order, that you can't have a situation whereby 75% of the administration for 75% of the time is answering these queries.
If you have actually this right to privacy law, if it comes in, must protect the citizen from government peeping in too much and from private agencies peeping in too much. It cannot be juxtaposed with the Right to Information Act, which is citizens watching the government.
That's just what we're trying to debate.
Vikram, for the record, let me just read out those 4 lines, which the Supreme Court alluded to. The nation does not want a scenario where 75% of the staff of public authorities spend 75% of their time in collecting and furnishing information to applicants instead of discharging their regular duties.
Can I-
Is that happening, by the way?
That is what
Can I
the
ask-
Supreme Court
let
has
us ask
said when you're trying to balance the
that happening,
equities.
I've actually done a calculation on this, and the truth is, it's less than 4% of the staff spending less than 4% of their time on giving information.
Then you must file a review to the Supreme Court order.
No, I mean, this is
you
not
must
an
file a
order.
review and
It's an
attempt the
arbiter
Supreme Court to
made.
correct
No,
government.
I'm sorry.
That's
So
a
many
comment.
arbiters have been made like this, which show the Supreme Court's mind. Now, you can't argue. You say not more than.
Okay.
You can say it's zero. I
Fine.
think
So
this
you're
is
saying people are
completely-
not spending too much time. Okay.
India's #1 news app. Just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for retina display. Full screen view. Faster response time. And Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.